Welcome back, friends. We're going to be doing a Java tutorial today, and let's get started. This is a puzzle that we're going to make. It'll involve arrays and even a list, and we're going to be building constructor and some methods and a client class. But first, let's figure out what this game actually does and what the final product is supposed to look like. So here's it's a square. So it's a bunch of numbers from 1 to 9. This is a 3 by 3, so that's 3 by 3. And it's got some results on the bottom, says however many tries, and the sum of 15. So what it's trying to say is the total, no matter how you slice it, so this is one row and another row, another row. Each row, if you add them up, that's 15, 15, and a 15. And each column, 15, if you total them up, 15, 15. And finally, diagonals, 5, 2, and 8, 15, 4, 5, and 6, 15. So that's the whole point of the game. It's to keep rolling, or rather keep shaking. Imagine you've got a can of a bunch of dice or numbers, and you just want to keep shaking it. And then once you throw it, you want to get a combination of numbers where whichever direction you calculate, you're going to get the same value. And this is pretty hard to get. And you got to be really lucky to get this, which is why even the computer had to try 31,000 times to get this combination. And of course, to the computer, this is, it's pretty easy. There are 30,000 loops. It takes just a few seconds. So, or even in fact, milliseconds for most computers. But then of course, as it gets bigger, 4 by 4, you can imagine to get the combination where every row and every column and every diagonal is the same sum, that's probably going to take much longer. And of course, if you go 5, 6, and so on, it's going to be exponentially so. So now that we know the object of the game, let's go into the actual program itself. So here we've got some instance variables. And personally, I'm not very sure what the assignment is calling when it says students whose last name A to G. So I'm guessing if you were in this teacher's class, if your last name fell between A and G, go ahead and use a one-dimensional array, so on and so forth. But in our case, since I really don't care. I'm not a student in this class. My last name does land on it between S and Z, but it looks like it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to be creating all three. And as for the method itself to figure out, the sums and all that, I'm actually going to be using a two-dimensional array, which I think will reflect this better. So let's get started with the program itself. Here's BlueJ. And I've already created a new project. I called it Puzzle 1. And the first thing that they want us to do is to create, let's go ahead and create a class. And this class, let's see, it's going to be called NXN your initials. Okay, so class, I'll call it NXN. My initials BKT. Okay, let's go inside of it. All right. So it creates an array of n square and filled 1, 2, 3, all the way up to n square. So as an example, the constructor, if I pass in a 5, which means the n is 5, the array is going to start at 1, go all the way up, increment by 1, all the way up to 25, which is 5 square. Okay, so that sounds pretty straightforward. So I'm going to declare this instance variable as int n, as it says here, int n. And I'm going to do, oh yeah, I gotta create these instance variables, right? So let's go ahead and do that. private, and I'm going to be using integer arrays. I'll call this one 1dim for the 1dim array. Call this, oops, new int. And the size is going to be n times n, okay, which is n squared. For the two-dimensional arrays, it's going to look something like this. 2dim equals new int n and an n. And finally, for the array list, I'm going to have to import a package to use this. Array list. It's going to have an integer. I'll call it my array list. All right. It'll give me an error. It just means I need to import the package for it. It is java.util.arraylist. Okay, so now I've got my instance variables in the way that the question asks. Next, I'm going to have to create this constructor that does what it says here. So let's go ahead and create a constructor. Okay, I'll just follow this template. All right. First, it says here I need to pass in a number, and the number is going to be whatever n is. I don't want to confuse it. I'll just call it num. And n from our private variable or instance variable is going to be whatever the user passes in. So this num is going to be a number that the user types in, and I'm going to initialize whatever that number is into our instance variable n. And I'll go ahead and initialize the rest of them too. Int n times n. 2dim equals new int n n. Okay. And what we're going to do for this one, we're going to initialize the numbers 1 to n square, and it's going to increment by 1. So we're going to involve just using the increment operator or just using a +1. I'll go ahead and do the 1dim array first. So I'll start a for loop. And we got to make sure that it stops at n squared. So we want to go all the way, starting from index 0 all the way to the index of n squared. So over here, we initialize the one-dimensional array at from index 0 all the way. And I'm going to start it at the number 1, which is, since I starts at 0, I'm going to say I +1. So the very first time it enters index 0 of this array will be the number 1, and then it goes loops back in. The next one will be 1 + 1, which is 2, 3, and then 4, and it keeps going. And since I have this loop, I can update my array list as well using the add method. Okay, so array lists are a little different from arrays in that they have their own methods. So if you've never seen this before, you can look it up. And .add is part of the methods that array lists use in order to add numbers into it. Okay, so I'll do the same thing there. And now to initialize the two-dimensional array, it's going to be a little different. Okay, and let's see. So when we're dealing with two-dimensional arrays, let me pull up my trusty paint here. What it's going to look like is, so say I have a one-dimensional array of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So imagine this is my one-dimensional array. If I were to break it up evenly, and I want to set it to two-dimensional arrays, it would look something like this. I could break it up evenly right here, and finally right here, right? So what this does is it makes this whole thing one index, and then this thing inside its own index. I'll make it green. So if I had, say, an array, two-dimensional array, in this case, if my n is equal to 3, okay. Well, it actually technically be 2, but imagine it's size 3. So we have 1, 2, 3, and then we have 1, 2, 3 inside the array. So what this would look like, if I were to isolate this particular number, I'll make it purple. If I wanted to isolate this number, I would have to look for index 0. So let me go ahead and erase this guy here. And I will set the arrays. This is index 0, this whole thing, index 1, and this whole thing, index 2. Okay. So I would set the first square bracket would have 0 in there. And to isolate this one, this in purple is index 0 and 1 and a 2. And similarly for this one, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. So if I get the first argument index 0 and the second argument index 0, I have 0, 0, which is 0 and 0, that's the 1. Okay. And I'll just call this x. So x of index 0, 0. So what if I had x at index 1 and index 2? So that would be, I look at the 1 first, which is what I have in red. Okay, index 1, so it's in here somewhere. And then I'll look at the purple at index 2. Inside here, index 2 is this one. So this is the number that I isolate, which is 6. All right. So you can see that I can't start from 0 and then go all the way to n squared. It'll go outside of my range. I can only go from 0 to 2, no matter which, whether I'm in the inner array or the outer array. So the outer array are these big numbers, and the inner array are these little numbers here. So I'm going to have to limit it to whatever n is, and I'll show you what I mean. Here, I'm going to have to do 2 for loops, one that will take care of the outer and another that will take care of the inner. Okay. I equals 0, I less than n, I plus plus. So this loop will only go from 0 to whatever n is. And if I started at 3, so it'll be 0 and then 1 and then 2 and stop. So 0, 1, 2, it stops at 2 before hitting 3. So this is the outer loop. This is the loop that takes care of this guy right here. All right. And now we'll go ahead and handle the loop inside these smaller ones. and I'll use a j for that. Int j equals 0. J also less than n, j plus plus. Now that I'm here, I can go ahead and make my adjustments however I need to. I need to set 1 in the first one and 9 in the last one, incrementing by 1 each time. So it would look something like this. I'll take my 2dim, and I'll take the outer. Remember, this is the outer one in red. So the outer one will increment much slower. Okay. And I'll take the inner one, j, which is here. And I will set it to, well, since I need it to just increment, I'll set it to just some variable that I can increment. I'll call it count. I don't have a count yet, so I will create one here. Count. I'll start it at 1. Okay. And then once I added count in there, once 1 goes into 0, 0 at the very first time, I will increment count by 1. And then the next time it goes into the loop, it'll be at, or rather it'll continue in this loop at 0, 1. This count would have already been incremented, and this will be a 2. And then you keep going until you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in a nice 2-dimensional array. Oops. Okay. Now that we have these, now that we have this constructor, we want to make sure that it works. And I like to test things out. So the best way to test it, and even he says it here, use print me to check the other methods. So I'm going to use a print me to check this method, or rather to check this constructor that it does work. Okay, so the print me is just going to print each of these instance variables. Let's take this out. And the print me is going to be a void. Print me. Okay. Let's separate them out. System out.print line. Call this 1dim. And I'll need a for loop to iterate through everything. N squared, I plus plus. So this one I'll just call system. I'll take 1dim at that index of I, and I'll give it a little space so we can see. All right. So this will print out our 1-dimensional array nicely. And I'm going to copy this out for the array list. This will be our list. I'll put a new line there. And this one, instead of 1dim, I'll change it to my array list. And I'll use the method get at that index. So the get is basically doing the same thing as this. It's just going to find the position at that, or find the value at that index I. And finally, let's go ahead and print out the 2-dimensional array. 2dim. And for this one, I'm going to need 2 for loops. Both will have a limit at n for int j equals 0. And here I will simply do system.out.print to dim. It'll be at that particular position, to dim INJ. I'll give it a space. All right. And let me go ahead and give a couple new lines here. Just to make it look more presentable. I want to be able to see my data nicely. Okay. I'll compile to make sure there are no errors. Great. And let me go ahead and bring this down here and make this a little smaller. Okay. So in order for us to test this, and even this says we need a client that'll instantiate an XN puzzle and solve it. Okay, so let's test this out by creating a client. I'll go ahead and hit new class, and this will be called, doesn't say what we should call it. I'll just call it client. Client and XN BKT. Okay, get into the code. And here I have, I'm actually not going to need any of these. Go ahead and do static void. Okay, so over here, first thing I need is to go ahead and call our object, and the object is called nxnbkt. I'll call my object as obj equals new nxnbkt. And remember, we need an argument in here. So I'm just going to put the number 3 in there. So this will construct it. And to make sure that it constructed correctly, I'll go ahead and do the print me method. So just object.print me. Okay, let's compile that. And let's go ahead and test it. There we go. Looks pretty good. We've got the one-dimensional array just doing 1 to 9, which is perfect because 3 squared is 9, so it stops at 9. The array list looks exactly the same. And the two-dimensional array, so that we can see that it's being divided, I went ahead and put new lines in there. I just put a new line here and here. Well, actually, it was this new line. This new line will separate it after each iteration of this for loop. So this is the inner array, and I wanted it to match kind of what the assignment is showing, so it's a nice square there. Okay, so this is the first step to creating this game, and I'll continue in the next video.